Well, if it isn't my favorite people, hope you guys are well, because today I have something interesting to share with my tribe. And yes, I might make you feel a little uncomfortable, rattle a few feathers, but hey ho, sometimes we need the hard truth. So answer me this. Have you ever felt more alone after getting sexual attention than before? Like being desired made you feel more invisible, not less? Stay with me, okay? Because what I'm about to show you will change everything you thought you knew about empowerment. Have you ever used your sexuality to feel powerful, but ended up feeling empty? Ever been physically intimate with someone while keeping them emotionally distant? Ever projected sexual confidence, performed desirability even, made your body your primary source of value while feeling completely disconnected from yourself underneath it all? That moment when you realize you can be naked with someone physically but completely closed off emotionally, and when you can perform sexuality, command attention and control how people actually see you through your body, but you can't actually let anyone close enough to see who you really are. When you've built your entire identity around being sexually desirable, sexually confident, sexually available, but you're exhausted from the performance, empty from the attention that never actually fills you, lonely despite being surrounded by people who want you. And you're not broken, and you're not alone in that emptiness, because we live in the most hypersexualized culture in human history at the moment. Social media rewards increasingly sexual content. OnlyFans has normalized sex work as empowerment. Positive messaging has gone from healthy boundaries to no boundaries. Young women are growing up believing that sexual availability equals power, that desirability equals worth, and that being hypersexual is the same as being confident. We're even told that owning your sexuality is empowerment, that being sexually free from liberation, that controlling how people see you through your body is taking your power back. And yeah, on the surface, it sounds empowering. It sounds like sexual agency. It sounds like women finally being free to express their sexuality without shame. But here's what nobody talks about. There's a difference between authentic sexual expression and using your sexuality as armor. Between being sexually empowered and using your sexuality to avoid emotional vulnerability. Between sexual confidence and hypersexuality as a trauma response. And that difference, it's the difference between genuine intimacy and profound loneliness. Before I go deeper, I want you guys to drop a comment right now. Have you ever felt more alone after getting sexual attention? Yes or no? I want to know if I'm the only one who sees this pattern. Because this is the hypersexual mask. It's leaving an entire generation of young women feeling empty, performing confidence they don't actually feel, using their bodies to get attention that never actually makes them feel seen. If you think about Megan Thee Stallion for a moment, incredibly talented rapper, beautiful, successful projects more sexual confidence than almost anyone in the industry. We're talking about Hot Girl Summer, body positivity, sexual freedom. Her entire brand is built on being sexually dominant, sexually confident, in control of her sexuality and her image. Her music is very hypersexual. Her performances are hypersexual. Her social media presence is hypersexual. She's built an empire on projecting sexual power and confidence. And millions of young women look at her and think that's what empowerment looks like. That's what confidence looks like. That's what taking control of your sexuality actually looks like. But if you look a little bit closer, look at what happened to her. Look at the trauma she's carrying. She was shot by someone she trusted, someone she was intimate with. And instead of receiving support, she was questioned, disbelieved, mocked, even turned into a meme. Her trauma became public entertainment. And she even lost her mother, her anchor, her support system, the person who protected her. And she had to grieve publicly while maintaining her hot girl persona. She's been betrayed by people in the industry, used, exploited, sexualized since she was a teenager trying to break into rap. And through it all, what does she do? She projects strength, sexual dominance, confidence, that I don't need anyone, I'm in control, I'm powerful energy. But is that authentic sexual expression, or is that armor? Is that genuine confidence, or is that protection? Is she being hypersexual because she's empowered, or because being hypersexual gives her control over how people see her, keeps them at a distance, prevents them from getting close enough to hurt her? And I'm not here to diagnose Megan specifically. Only she knows her truth and what she's working through. But her public pattern represents something millions of young women are experiencing, using sexuality as a mask, as an armor, as projection against vulnerability, and calling it empowerment. And here's what I know for sure, though. This isn't just happening to celebrities with public trauma. It's happening everywhere. It's happening to the young woman who posts increasingly sexual content on social media, because that's the only time she feels valuable, the only time she gets attention, the only time she actually feels seen, even though the attention leaves her feeling empty. It's even happening to women who can have casual sex easily, but can't be emotionally intimate with anyone, who can be physically naked, but emotionally closed, who uses sex to feel powerful while avoiding the vulnerability of actual connection. Happening to women who's been sexually assaulted or abused and now uses hypersexuality to reclaim control. If I sexualize myself, no one else can sexualize me. And if I'm sexually dominant, I can't be violated again. It's happening to women who grew up being valued only for her looks, only for her body, only for her sexual appeal. And now that's the only way she knows how to get attention, to feel worthy, to have power. It's happening to women who so disconnected from her body, she's so traumatized, so wounded, that performing sexuality feels safer than actually feeling it. That being hypersexual is easier than being vulnerable. And the result, a generation of young women who are more sexually active than ever, but more emotionally disconnected than ever. Who can perform intimacy but can't experience it, who use their bodies to get attention but feel invisible underneath the performance, who believe they're empowered but feel empty. And this is the hypersexual mask, using sexuality as armor instead of authentic expression, performing desirability to avoid vulnerability, and confusing sexual attention with being truly seen. And it's one of the loneliest patterns in our time. If you think about your own life for a moment, have you ever used your sexuality to feel powerful when you actually felt powerless? Have you ever been sexual with someone to keep them interested while keeping them emotionally distant? Have you ever performed confidence through sexuality while feeling completely disconnected from yourself? And have you ever posted sexual content online and felt that rush when people responded, but then felt empty afterwards? Like the attention didn't actually feel anything. Like being desired didn't make you feel valuable. Have you ever noticed that you can actually be physically intimate easily, but emotionally intimate never? That you could be naked with someone, but you can't actually let them see who you are. That sex feels safer than vulnerability. If you're honest, you might recognize that your sexuality has become a mask, a performance, a way to control how people actually see you while preventing them from actually knowing who you are, a way to feel powerful while avoiding the vulnerability of real intimacy. And I get it, you think you're being empowered, you think you're being confident, you think you're taking control of your sexuality, but really you're using sexuality as armor, a protection, as a way to get attention without being seen, as a way to feel or be desired without being known, as a way to feel powerful without being vulnerable. And that's not really empowerment, that's protection. And it's keeping you from the very intimacy you're craving underneath the performance. And this is the hypersexual mask, and understanding just how it works, why we develop it, what we're actually projecting, and how, to take it off. Taking it off is the first step to finally experiencing real intimacy instead of performed sexuality. So in the next part, I'm going to show you the first truth that no one really wants to talk about or really admit. Why this sexuality you think is empowering you might actually be the armor keeping you lonely, and what Megan's story reveals about what you're really projecting. Part 2 drops next, so don't miss that. And as I always say, guys, stay beautiful, stay connected, and stay conscious in the field. Hello, welcome back. And if you've watched part 1, we're exposing the hypersexual mask. Why using sexuality as armor instead of authentic expression keeps you lonely. So if you haven't watched part 1, take a look at that before you kind of dive into this one. But here we go, because the truth nobody wants to admit, the sexuality you think is empowering you might actually be the thing keeping you from ever truly seeing, or keeping people from ever truly seeing you. And what happened to Megan reveals exactly what you're protecting. The first truth about the hypersexual mask is this: hypersexuality isn't always empowerment. Sometimes it's an armor protecting a wound you haven't healed. And using sexuality to control how people see you prevents them from actually seeing you. Here's what's actually happening when you're caught in the hypersexual mask pattern. All right, so you've learned through trauma, through early experiences, through cultural messaging, that your value is your sexual appeal, that your power is your desirability, that your worth is determined by how much people actually want you. Maybe you were sexualized early, maybe you were abused, maybe you were valued only for your looks, maybe you learned that sexual attention was the only attention you could get. Maybe you discovered that being sexual gave you power in a world where you felt powerless. And so you developed a strategy, you use sexuality as your primary source of value and power. You learn to perform it, project it, to make it your identity, to use your body to get attention, to feel valuable, to have control, and it worked. People responded, you got attention, you felt powerful, you had control over how people saw you. But here's the trap: the attention never actually fills you. The power never really makes you feel secure. The control never actually makes you feel safe, because what you're really craving isn't sexual attention, it's being truly seen. Not desired, but known. Not wanted for your body, but valued for who you are. And you can't get that while you're wearing the hypersexual mask, because the mask is designed to prevent people from seeing past your sexuality to who you actually are underneath. If you think about Megan Thee Stallion's pattern, her entire public persona is built on sexual dominance and confidence. But look at what happened when she was vulnerable, when she was hurt, when she needed support. She was shot, a profound violation, a betrayal by someone she trusted. And instead of being seen as a human being in pain, she was questioned and mocked, turned into a meme even. Because the truth is, people couldn't see past the mask. They couldn't see past Megan Thee Stallion, the hot girl, the C. Megan Pete, the wounded human being. The hypersexual mask that gave her power also prevented people from seeing her pain. The armor that protected her also isolated her. And she had to go back to performing the mask, back to being the hot girl, back to projecting sexual confidence and strength, because that's the only version of herself people were willing to see. And this is what makes the hypersexual mask so painful? You know, the very thing you use to get attention prevents you from being truly seen. You know, you perform sexuality to feel valuable, but people only value your sexuality, not you. You use your body to get attention, but the attention is for your body, not for who you actually are. You project sexual confidence to feel powerful, but the power is conditional. It's conditional on maintaining the performance, which is exhausting. Hold up right for a second. You know, I want you to comment now. Have you ever had someone compliment your body, but it made you feel more invisible, not less? Like they're looking right at you, but not actually seeing you. Comment invisible if you've ever been desired while feeling completely unseen. All right. So also just think about your own patterns. That when you're being hypersexual, when you're posting sexual content, when you're performing desirability, when you're using sexuality to get attention, what are you actually seeking? Is it really sexual expression, or is it validation, attention, proof that you're valuable, a way to feel powerful when you actually feel powerless? And when you get that attention, when people respond to your sexuality, when they desire you, when they want you, does it actually feel you? Does it make you feel truly seen, or does it leave you feeling empty, like they're responding to the mask but missing the person underneath? If you're honest, you might recognize that your hypersexuality isn't about authentic sexual expression at all. You know, it's about protection, about control, about getting attention in a way that feels safer than actual vulnerability. Because here's what the hypersexual mask actually does. It lets you be seen without being known. It lets you get attention without being vulnerable. It lets you feel desired without risking rejection of who you actually are. And if someone wants you sexually, that's about your body. It's not about you. So if they reject you, they're rejecting the performance, not the person. The mask protects you from the vulnerability of being truly seen and potentially rejected. But it also prevents you from experiencing real intimacy as well. Because real intimacy requires being known, not just desired. It requires emotional vulnerability, not just physical nakedness. It requires letting someone see past the mask to who you actually are. And that's terrifying when you've been hurt. If you think about Megan's pattern after the shooting, after being betrayed, violated, publicly humiliated, of course she went back to the mask. You know, of course she doubled down on the hot girl persona. Of course she projected even more sexual confidence and dominance, because the mask feels safer than vulnerability. You know, performing sexuality feels more controllable than emotional intimacy. Being desired feels less risky than being known. But it also keeps her isolated. You know, it keeps her performing. It keeps her from experiencing the very connection and support she needs to heal. And this is what happens when sexuality becomes armor instead of authentic expression. Authentic sexual expression is about connection. It's vulnerable. It's an extension of emotional intimacy. It makes you feel more connected to yourself and others. It's integrated with who you are, not separated from it. Sexuality as armor is all about protection. It's performed. It's a substitute for emotional intimacy. It makes you feel disconnected despite physical closeness. It's a mask you wear, not an authentic part of you. But authentic self-expression, it makes you feel whole, seen, connected, more yourself. You know, sexuality as armor makes you feel empty, invisible underneath the performance, disconnected, less yourself. But authentic sexual expression brings people closer, creates intimacy, deepens connection. Sexuality as armor keeps people at a distance, prevents intimacy, you know, maintains separation. So if you think about your own experience when you're being sexual, is it bringing you closer to people or keeping them at a distance? Is it making you feel more connected to yourself or disconnected? Is it authentic expression or protective performance? That's the question. And if you can be physically intimate with someone but emotionally closed off, that's not intimacy, that's protection. If you can perform sexuality confidently but can't be vulnerable, well, that's not empowerment, that's armor. And if you get attention for your sexuality but feel invisible as a person, that's not being seen, that's being objectified, even if you're the one doing the objectifying. Here's the painful truth, guys, that nobody wants to say out loud, but you know me, I'm always willing to say it. In our culture right now, we're calling everything empowerment. We're calling hypersexuality empowerment. We're calling sexual availability empowerment. We're calling performing for male attention empowerment. But empowerment isn't performing sexuality to get validation. Empowerment is being so secure in yourself that you don't need external validation. I'm going to say that again for those in the back, okay? Empowerment is about being so secure in yourself that you don't need validation, external validation. Empowerment isn't about using your body as your primary source of value. Empowerment is about knowing your value exists independent of your body. Empowerment isn't being sexually available to feel powerful. Empowerment is having boundaries around your sexuality because you value yourself. Real sexual empowerment is when your sexuality is integrated with who you are, not separated from it. When it's authentic, when it's an authentic expression of connection, not performance for attention, when it makes you feel whole and not empty. And if your sexuality is making you feel empty, if it's keeping you or keeping people at a distance, if it's a performance rather than authentic expression, it's not empowerment, it's armor. And armor protects wounds, but it also prevents healing. Think about Megan's exhaustion. You can see it sometimes underneath the performance. The wariness of always having to be on, always having to be the hot girl, always having to project sexual confidence and dominance because maintaining armor is exhausting. It just is. Performing constantly is draining. Being desired but not known is lonely. And the tragedy, the tragedy is that the wound the armor is protecting, the trauma, the pain, the fear of being hurt again can't heal while it's covered by armor. And that's the sad truth. You have to take the armor off to heal. You have to be vulnerable to experience real intimacy. You have to let people see past the sexuality to who you actually are. But that feels terrifying when you've been hurt, when your vulnerability is being violated, when being seen has led to pain. So you keep the mask on, you mask up, you keep performing, you keep using sexuality as armor, and you stay lonely underneath the attention, empty underneath the desire, unseen underneath the performance. This is the first truth. Hypersexuality isn't always empowerment. Sometimes it's armor protecting a wound. And using sexuality to control how people see you prevents them from actually seeing you. The mask that gives you power also keeps you isolated. The armor that protects you also prevents, intimacy, and you can't heal what you're hiding behind a performance. That's the first truth, guys. Your sexuality might be armor, not empowerment. But here's where it gets deeper. In part 3, I'm going to show you why you can be sexually naked with someone, but emotionally you're wearing a full suit of armor, and why that separation is keeping you lonelier than being alone ever could. All right, so don't miss truth 2 drops next. And as I always say, guys, stay beautiful, stay connected, and stay conscious in the field. Hello, welcome. Those that are new, those that are my existing tribe. As always, I'm going to continue with the truth about the hypersexual mask. If you've been following the series, we're dismantling the hypersexual mask and the truth 1. And truth 1 showed you that sexuality can be armor and not empowerment. Now, here's the truth that's going to hit different. You can take off all your clothes and still be completely hidden. And that's why you keep feeling empty no matter how intimate you get. So let's expose this, all right? So the second truth about the hypersexual mask is this. When you can be physically naked but emotionally closed, you're not being intimate. You're being protected. And confusing sexual attention with being truly seen will leave you feeling empty no matter how much attention you get. Here's the deeper pattern underneath the hypersexual mask. You've learned to separate physical intimacy from emotional intimacy. You know, to disconnect your body from your heart, to perform sexuality while keeping your actual self hidden. You can be naked physically, but you're completely covered emotionally. You can have sex, but you can't be vulnerable. You can perform desirability, but you can't show your pain. You can let someone close to your body, but not close to who you actually are. And you think this is protecting you. You think this is control. You think this is power, but really it's preventing you from experiencing the very intimacy you're craving. Because here's the truth, physical intimacy without emotional intimacy isn't actually intimacy. It's just physical. And physical without emotional leaves you feeling empty, disconnected, and used. Even when you're the one initiating, even when you're the one in control, think about what real intimacy actually is. It's not just physical closeness. It's emotional vulnerability. You know, it's being truly seen, your wounds, your fears, your authentic self, and being accepted anyway. You know, it's letting people or letting someone past your armor to who you actually are underneath. And that kind of intimacy requires emotional nakedness, not just physical nakedness. But when you're wearing the hypersexual mask, emotional nakedness feels far more terrifying than physical nakedness. You can take off your clothes, but you can't take off the mask. You can be sexual, but you can't be vulnerable. You can perform intimacy, but you can't experience it. Think about Megan Thee Stallion's pattern in relationships. Look at what's been public. Look at the pattern of physical involvement without emotional depth, of sexual relationships that don't translate into emotional intimacy. Let me take some water, guys. 1 second. Yeah, so I was saying, you know, of sexual relationships that doesn't translate into emotional intimacy, of keeping people at arm's length, even while being physically close. After the shooting, after the betrayal, after the trauma, of course she can't be emotionally vulnerable. You know, of course she can't be emotionally vulnerable. Of course she keeps people at a distance. Of course physical intimacy feels safer than emotional intimacy, because physical intimacy is controllable. You know, you can perform it, you can maintain power, you can keep the mask on. But emotional intimacy requires taking the mask off, showing your wounds, being vulnerable, risking being hurt again. And when you've been hurt as badly as she has, you know, when your vulnerability has been violated, let's say, when your trust has been betrayed, when your pain has been turned into public entertainment, emotional vulnerability feels impossible. So you stay physically available but emotionally closed. You know, sexually open but emotionally guarded, desired but not really know. And you tell yourself that, that's enough. Yeah, physical intimacy is intimacy. That being wanted is the same as being valued. That sexual attention is the same as being seen, but it's not. And deep down, you know it's not. You know? So I want you to write a comment and don't lie, okay? Have you ever been lying next to someone after being intimate and felt more alone than if you were by yourself? Like your body was right there, but you weren't even in the room. Comment wasn't even there if you've ever been physically present but emotionally a million miles away. Because after every sexual encounter, after every performance, after every moment of attention, you still feel empty, still feel unseen, still feel lonely despite being surrounded by people who want you, but because they don't really want you. That's why they want your body, but they want the performance, they want the mask. And you can't feel truly seen when you're hiding behind a mask. You can't feel truly valued when you're being only valued for your sexuality. You can't really feel truly connected when you're keeping people at an emotional distance. And if you think about your own patterns, how many times have you been physically intimate with someone while keeping them emotionally distant? How many times have you had sex but couldn't be vulnerable? How many times have you performed sexuality but felt completely disconnected from yourself during it? And how many times have you gotten sexual attention and felt a temporary rush, but then felt empty after, like the attention didn't actually really feel anything? Like being desired didn't make you feel valuable. How many times have you seen someone physically but felt completely alone? Or been with someone physically, I should say, but felt completely alone? Like they were close to your body but nowhere near your heart. Like they were touching the mask but missing the person underneath. And if you're honest, you might recognize that you've been confusing physical intimacy with emotional intimacy, using sex as a substitute for vulnerability, that you've been performing sexuality while avoiding the very connection you're actually craving. And here's the painful truth: no amount of sexual attention will ever make you feel truly seen. No amount of desire, no amount of being desired, I should say, will ever satisfy the craving to be truly known, because what you're actually seeking isn't sexual, it's emotional. You don't need more people to want your body. You need someone to see your heart. And you don't need to be more desirable. You need to be just truly known. But you can't experience that while you're wearing the hypersexual mask, because the mask is designed to get attention while preventing people from actually seeing past your sexuality to who you actually are. So if you think about women who follow Megan, who emulate her, who believe that her hypersexual confidence is the path to empowerment. They see the attention she gets, the power she projects, the control she seems to have, but they don't really see the emptiness underneath, the loneliness of being desired but not known, the exhaustion of maintaining the performance, the wound that the armor is projecting or protecting. They're learning that sexual attention equals value, that desirability equals power, that hypersexuality equals confidence. And they're performing sexuality to get attention while feeling empty underneath the performance. They're being physically intimate while staying emotionally closed. They're confusing sexual validation with being truly seen, and they're going to spend years feeling empty, wondering why the attention doesn't fill them, never really realizing that what they're seeking can't be found through sexuality. It can only be found through vulnerability. And this is what makes the hypersexual mask so insidious. Is in our current culture, we've completely separated physical intimacy from emotional intimacy. We've normalized, if I can speak, we've normalized casual sex, hookup culture, physical availability without emotional connection. We've made it seem like physical intimacy without emotional intimacy is just normal and healthy, and empowering. But it's not. It's not. It's disconnecting. It's empty. And it's leaving an entire generation feeling lonely despite being more sexually active than ever, because humans aren't designed for physical intimacy without emotional connection. We're not wired to separate our bodies from our hearts. Yes, we can do it, we can perform it, but it leaves us feeling fragmented, disconnected, empty. Real intimacy, the kind that actually fills you, that makes you feel truly seen, that creates genuine connection, requires emotional vulnerability, not just physical nakedness. It requires letting someone see your wounds, not just your body, your fears, not just your confidence, your authentic self, not just your performance. And that's terrifying. Terrifying when you've been hurt. You know, when your vulnerability has been violated, when emotional openness has led to pain. So you stay behind the mask, you keep physical and emotional intimacy separated, and you perform sexuality while protecting your heart, but you also stay empty, unseen, lonely, despite the attention, craving connection while preventing it. Think about what you're actually seeking when you're being hypersexual. When you're posting sexual content, when you're performing desirability, when you're being physically intimate, what are you hoping will happen? What are you hoping to feel vulnerable? Sorry, are you hoping to feel valuable? To feel seen? To feel worthy? To feel powerful? To feel less alone? And when you get the attention, when people respond to your sexuality, does it actually give you those things? Or does it give you a temporary rush that fades quickly, leaving you feeling just as empty as before? If you're honest, if you're truly honest, the attention probably doesn't even feel you, because sexual attention can't really feel an emotional need. That's not how it works. Physical intimacy can't satisfy a craving for emotional connection being desired, can't make you feel truly valued. Only emotional vulnerability can do that. Only being truly seen, heart, wounds, authentic self can make you feel known. Only emotional intimacy can create real connection, but that requires taking the mask off, being emotionally naked, not just physically naked, risking vulnerability instead of hiding behind sexuality. And that feels impossible when you've been hurt. So you stay behind the mask and you stay empty. This is the second truth. When you can be physically naked but emotionally closed, you're not being intimate, you're being protected. Physical intimacy without emotional vulnerability isn't connection, it's performance. That's the truth too. You know, physical without emotional intimacy. That's truth too. Physical without emotional intimacy. Without emotional isn't intimacy. That's what I meant to say. It's just performance. It's just performance. But here's the final truth that's going to shake everything. In part 4, I'm going to be revealing why building your worth on being sexually desirable is building on quicksand, and what happens when the one thing you've made your identity starts to fade. Truth 3 drops next, and this is the one that changes everything. So look out for that, guys. And as I always say, stay beautiful, stay connected, and stay conscious in the field. Hello, my people. I'm back. And if you've been with me through this series, you know we've been dismantling the hypersexual mask. And the first 2 truths kind of showed you that sexuality can be armor, and that physical intimacy without emotional vulnerability isn't really real connection. You know, now here's the final truth that's gonna kind of hit the hardest. All right, the thing you've built your entire identity on is temporary. And what happens when it fades will either destroy you or force you to discover who you actually are. So let's finish this. The third final truth about the hypersexual mask is this. When you're building your worth on sexual desirability is building on quicksand. That's what it's like, because desirability fades, trends change, and when the attention stops, you're left facing the person you've been avoiding underneath the mask. And here's the reality nobody wants to talk about when we're celebrating hypersexuality as empowerment. If your value, I should say, is your sexual appeal, your worth is temporary. And if your power is your desirability, your power has an expiration date. You know, if your identity is being sexually wanted, your identity is dependent on other people's attention. And that attention is conditional, changeable, and ultimately just unreliable. You know, you might be getting attention now, you might be you might feel powerful now, you might feel valuable now, but what happens when the attention fades, when trends change, when you age, when your body changes, when people stop responding to your sexuality the way they used to? What happens when the mask stops working? Because here's the truth about building your identity on external validation. It's building on quicksand. It really is, because it feels so solid when you're standing on it, but it's constantly shifting, constantly unstable, and eventually it will sink. And if you think about Megan Thee Stallion's position right now, she's at her peak of her career. She's getting massive attention. She has power, influence, visibility, but she's also watching the cultural shift. She's seeing younger women come up behind her. She's seeing trends change. She's seeing that the hot girl persona that gave her her power is also a trap, because it's temporary. It's exhausting to maintain, and it's keeping her from being seen as anything beyond that. And of course, at some point, whether it's, in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, the attention will shift. The culture will move on. The hot girl era will end. And then what? Who is Megan P when she's not Megan Thee Stallion, the hot girl? Who is she when the mask comes off? What's her value when it's not based on sexual desirability? Those are the questions that every woman wearing the hypersexual mask will eventually have to face. And if you haven't built an identity beyond the mask, if you haven't developed worth beyond your sexual appeal, if you haven't created value beyond being desired, those questions will devastate you. Because when you think you've made your entire, when the thing you've made your entire identity starts to fade, you're left with nothing. Think about it. No sense of self, no internal worth, no identity beyond what other people actually think. So real talk, comment now. Have you ever thought about who you'd be if you couldn't use your looks or your body to get attention? Like if that was taken away tomorrow, would you even know who you are underneath? Comment, who am I? If you've built so much of your identity on being desired that you're not sure who you'll be without it. Yeah, and think about the woman who built their entire identities on being hot girls, on being sexually desirable, on getting attention for their bodies. What happens when they age? When their bodies change, when the attention slows down, when younger, hotter women take their place? If they've built their worth on being desirable, they're going to feel worthless when the desirability fades. If you've built your entire, think about it, if you've built your entire power on attention, they're gonna feel powerless when the attention stops. If you've built your whole identity on the mask, they're gonna have to have an identity crisis. When the mask stops working, if I can speak. And this is the trap of building your worth on anything external. It's conditional. That's what it is. It's temporary. It's out of your control. Because real worth, the kind that sustains you, that grounds you, that makes you feel valuable regardless of external circumstances, has to come from within. It has to be based on who you are, not what you look like, on your character, not your body, on your authentic self, not your performance. But when you've been wearing the hypersexual mask, you haven't been developing your authentic self. You've been developing the performance. You've been building the mask, not the person underneath. And when the mask stops working, when you're left facing someone you don't know, someone you've been avoiding, someone you've been hiding from yourself and from everyone else, think about your own relationship with your sexuality and your worth. If you couldn't use your looks, if you couldn't use your body, if you couldn't use your sexual appeal to get attention, what would you have left? And that's a real question. What would you have left? Who would you be? What would your value be? How would you feel about yourself? And if the answer to those questions make you uncomfortable, if it makes you feel scared, if it makes you feel like you have nothing, that's a sign that you've built your identity on quicksand. because your worth should be independent of your looks. Your value should exist regardless of your body. Your identity should be rooted in who you are, not in how people respond to you sexually. And if it's not, if your worth is dependent on being desired, if your value is conditional on attention, if your identity is the mask, you're in danger, big danger, because the mask will stop working eventually. The attention will fade. Desirability will change because trends change. And you'll be left with a choice. Desperately trying to maintain the mask, get surgery. This is where surgery comes in. Perform harder, chase younger trends, fight against the inevitable of finally you take the mask off and face who you actually are underneath. The first option is exhausting, painful, and ultimately futile. You can't stop time. You can't maintain the performance forever. You can't build your worth on something temporary and expect it to last. The second option is terrifying, but also very much liberating. Taking off the mask means facing the wounds you've been avoiding, confronting the pain you've been hiding, discovering who you are beyond the performance, but it also means freedom, real worth that doesn't depend on external validation, real power that comes from knowing yourself, real identity that's rooted in authenticity and not performance. If you think about the women in our culture who are aging out of the hot girl era, who built their identities on being sexually desirable and are now watching that desirability fade. Some of them are fighting desperately to maintain it through surgery after surgery, performing harder, trying to stay relevant in a culture that values youth. And you can see the desperation from miles away, the fear, the panic of watching their identity slip. Others are finally taking the mask off, finally discovering that, they are beyond their sexuality, finally building worth that's internal, not external. And you can see the relief, the authenticity, the freedom, and of no longer really having to perform. The difference between those two paths is whether you've built your identity on the mask or on your authentic self. If you've built it on the mask, aging will terrify you. Change will devastate you. The loss of attention will feel like the loss of yourself, literally. But if you've built it on your authentic self, aging will free you. Change will be growth. The loss of attention will reveal what was always there underneath, your real worth, your real power, your identity, your real identity. Here's what nobody tells you when they're celebrating hypersexuality as empowerment. Empowerment that's dependent on other people's validation isn't really empowerment. It's performance. Think about it. And performance is exhausting, temporary, ultimately empty. Real empowerment is knowing your worth regardless of external validation. It's having that power, and it's having power that comes from within, not from attention. It's having an identity root in who you are, not how people see you. And you can't really get that while you're wearing the hypersexual mask. I wouldn't even say really, you don't get that. You can't get that because the mask is designed to get attention, not to develop authentic self-worth. Yeah, it's designed to perform power, not to cultivate real power. It's designed to create an identity based on external validation, not really internal knowing. Think about Megan's trajectory. Right now she's powerful because of the attention, the persona, the performance. But that power is conditional. It's dependent on maintaining the mask. It's temporary. Real power would be knowing your worth regardless of attention. I'm going to say that again. Real power will be knowing your worth regardless of the attention. Being rooted in who she is beyond the hot girl persona. Having an identity that exists beyond the external validation. And the tragedy is that the trauma she experienced, the shooting, the betrayal, the public humiliation could have been the catalyst for that transformation. It could have been the moment she took the mask off, faced her wounds and discovered her authentic self. But instead, You know, she went back to the mask, back to the performance, back to building her identity on the thing that's temporary, conditional, and ultimately unstable. And, you know, she'll keep performing until the mask stops working, until the attention fades, until the culture moves on. And then she'll face the same choice every woman wearing the hypersexual mask eventually faces. You know, keep fighting to maintain the performance, or finally take the mask off and discover who she actually is underneath. This is the third truth. Building your worth on sexual desirability is building on quicksand. Desirability fades, trends fade, trends change, attention shifts. And when the one thing you've built your identity on starts to crumble, you're left facing the person you've been avoiding underneath the mask. The mask gives you this temporary power, but prevents you from actually developing real power. You know, it gives you conditional worth, but prevents you from discovering authentic worth. It gives you an identity based on performance, but prevents you from actually knowing who you are. And eventually, the mask will stop working. The only question is, will you have built anything underneath it? Or will you be left with nothing when the performance ends? That's the third truth, guys. You know, your worth can't be built on what's temporary. Now, in the final part, I'm giving you the path forward, how you actually take the mask off, how to heal the wound underneath, and how to build real worth that doesn't depend on being desired. Part 5 is the solution, all right? So don't miss it. And as I always say, guys, stay beautiful, stay connected, and stay conscious in this field.